This episode of Places She Shapes is sponsored by JAC Project Management. Lottie thought her future was mapped out. University, languages, banking, a clear ladder to climb. But when one opportunity did not work out, another one opened up. In this episode, she talks about determination, resilience, learning to pivot without losing momentum, and the moment she realized she was sitting on the wrong side of the table. Now a managing director at Kennedy Wilson, Lottie reflects on drive, structure, mentorship, and building a career that keeps evolving. Lottie, hi, welcome to Places She Shapes at Abbey Road Studios. Thank you very much for being here. Would you mind telling me a bit about your role and the company that you're working for?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, amazing to be here. As you said, Lottie, I'm a managing director at Kennedy Wilson. We're a US investment company investing in real estate across the globe, focused on the US, the UK, and Ireland, and across all asset classes. So residential is really our key focus, but we also have investments in the industrial space and office and retail, and amongst others. And my role really is to focus on the strategy for Kennedy Wilson Europe. So we're €7 billion of assets under management across the UK and Ireland, which is really Europe for us as a business. And I focus on everything from coming up with ideas for new investments, raising capital, putting the capital structure together, publicizing kind of the message and the responsibility of the company. So a pretty broad role, but one that I'm very lucky to do.
Sounds like a high pressure job.
Yeah, I think most people have a high pressure job these days, but yeah, it is pretty high pressured. But I think that's what keeps me going, keeps me motivated. So I do enjoy that pressure aspect.
What is it about the role that you enjoy?
I guess it's very varied, and for me, being a generalist, sort of in the field of work that I do, is key to the role. You know, I've got sort of specialists all around me in Kennedy Wilson who are, you know, kind of industrial people through and through, or office experts, residential experts. I'm someone that's always enjoyed kind of having my fingers in lots of pies and having a broad range of kind of roles and responsibilities. So for me, the beauty of strategy, for us anyway, is that it really encompasses everything. And so I get to sort of stick my oar in and see what everyone is doing and try and kind of, you know, bring those projects together and make sure we've got kind of a cohesive message and cohesive strategy across the company, but, you know, with those specialisms that very much sit alongside that. So I think it's the diversity really for me that is the key to the sort of enjoyment of the role, I guess.
So if I'd asked you when you were 9 or 10 what you'd be doing for a living, what do you think you would have said?
I was either going to be a vet or a doctor at 9 or 10, but there's been quite a long list of jobs that I've been doing over the years in my mind. I guess when you're a kid, you know, you kind of gravitate towards those roles where you've got a costume in the dress-up box that's something you can put on and role play, etc. And I guess, you know, I like the idea of kind of helping people, whether that was through kind of being a vet, being a doctor, something like that. It's only as you get older and, you know, I guess do more subjects at school and actually realize what jobs are out there. And actually still today, I feel like I'm learning about new roles. I'll meet people at a networking event and they'll do something niche and specific. And I'll be like, wow, I didn't even realize that was a job, you know, and that's still today at the age I am. So you're kind of always discovering new roles out there. So I don't know, real estate definitely wasn't something that was on my radar. You know, it's not something in our family. It's not something I've been exposed to. So I've really kind of ended up here by luck, I guess. But yeah, the days of being a doctor and a vet, you know, behind me, and they're just people that I kind of look up to these days.
What were you into at school? Were you academic, sporty, social, creative?
Yeah. I was what was classed as an all-rounder. So I was lucky enough to be an all-rounder scholar at my kind of secondary school. And I guess actually, if I think back, that sort of makes sense now in terms of that more generalist role that I have and enjoy being a generalist and deliberately want to stay a generalist in, you know, in real estate in the industry that I'm in today. I mean, I was very academic. You know, I enjoyed working and learning, which is lucky, I guess, because not everybody enjoys kind of studying and doing exams. You know, I always wanted to do lots of subjects. If I think back, I did 13 GCSEs, which I think is more than most people, and you know, kind of succeeded and got A star in all of those, and did a broad range of subjects, lots of languages. So I've always enjoyed kind of being academic and learning, and probably fortunately, you know, didn't find most subjects that challenging, which meant that I could actually dedicate lots of time to doing other things as well. So Whether that was sport, music, drama, I did everything. And, it's hard to work out whether that's because my mum, signed me up to all these clubs and I just enjoyed them. And, she was my taxi driver, pack lunch maker for all of those kind of early years, taking me around. But, I guess I was, successful to an extent in all of them and enjoyed doing them. And so for as long as possible, tried to actually fill my day doing anything and everything, to the extent where, when I got to kind of secondary school, I actually ended up boarding in order to be able to have more time in the day and not waste time commuting on this hour-long bus to do more activities. So I've always been someone that's filled my time. I get bored fairly easily. I guess if you spoke to my husband, he'd probably say my biggest kind of, negative is that I never sit down and relax. And, that's partly because I do enjoy relaxing, with him, with anybody, but I really enjoy being busy. I enjoy getting stuff done. I enjoy kind of, I don't know, having things to do. So that probably plays through into why I was an all-rounder. And I kind of enjoyed that varied aspect at school. And it's probably one of the things, actually, as I've got older, having to give up lots of those kind of hobbies and passions is one of the, I don't struggle with it, but it's one of the things that I sort of wish I could still do. I sometimes pass on the way home, like these netball courts near where I live, and there's these like ladies playing netball. And for like 30 seconds, I look longingly like, oh, I wish I could be in that netball team. You just, you run out of time effectively, right? There's just not enough hours in a day. And so, through that, I've had to sort of, give up certain activities and passions along the way, but hopefully temporarily.
How did you then narrow down your subjects through A levels and university?
Yeah, it's interesting. Haven't thought about that for a while. I guess if I think back, and perhaps I sort of talked about being a doctor only early on, but even when I got to A-level stage, I was still pretty set on doing the sciences and maths and thinking about medicine. And I remember having a conversation with my parents and sort of saying, the thing is, I don't actually enjoy them as much as I enjoy languages. And, obviously having great support at school and talking to the teachers. And one piece of advice which they gave me was do the subjects for A-level that you enjoy the most, because you're more likely to succeed in something that you really enjoy than just doing something that you sort of think you should do or you think you'd like to do.
Yes.
And so I guess I sort of stopped at that point and said, okay, from doing that really broad range of GCSEs, actually narrowing down to A-levels, I did French, Spanish, maths and general studies, which, some people say don't count, but actually it's quite an interesting subject. So really, really sort of narrowed down and did the maths because I loved maths and I found maths, I found maths fairly easy. So I thought that wasn't going to be kind of too hard in A-level. And then the languages just because I loved them. And actually thinking ahead then to sort of university, I thought actually if I study languages, I get this year abroad. So I think, back then, the days of the EU, you got to do an Erasmus year effectively. So the third year of your 4-year degree was a year abroad. And I knew some people sort of older than me that were at university and said that was just, the most incredible experience. So I think it was a combination of really enjoying languages and thinking about the year abroad. I definitely didn't want to be a translator or an interpreter. I had no idea what I would do with them, but I just thought, okay, there's not that many people studying them. I think there's lots of transferable skills. And at this point, just focus on something that you enjoy. And so, ended up doing languages and maths for A-level effectively and then going on to study languages at university.
Great. You've said that ambition is in your DNA. Where do you think that came from?
I guess everything is sort of part nature, part nurture, isn't it? But, really I think that DNA of sort of ambition is just something that is within me from my parents. If I think back to being a child, I sort of grew up, sort of typical sort of, middle income family and, have one sister, two fairly young parents actually for their age. And my mum sort of dedicated her time to looking after me and my sister and, as I say, being our taxi driver, being our packed lunch maker, whatever it might be. And my dad was going out to work and he worked as started his career sort of in a PVC, a plastics kind of compounding factory down in Swindon, and sort of working on the machine lines. And this is the job that he did when I was younger, and then pretty quickly kind of rose up through the company, ended up at a young age becoming their MD. And in industry, you just have one MD effectively for the business, not like at Kennedy Wilson where there's a whole load of sort of talented MDs in the business. And eventually ended up sort of doing an MBO with a couple of colleagues, and then sold more recently his business to private equity. So. It's a pretty impressive story, and from somebody that kind of started at that level of the sort of business, literally on the factory floor, kind of, seeing how the machines work and all of the challenges and whatnot that comes with that, to actually leading a business and then ultimately selling it. I think is that there's so much to learn from that, and really I just watched Dad grow and grow from the bottom. He's got this experience that others that come in at the top, don't have. They don't understand the actual kind of day-to-day workings and sort of, everything that you can learn from that and use to grow the business and make it more, successful, efficient, whatever you might say. So I think it's just something that's always been in me. And that DNA is there, and I'm so fortunate for that. But I've also had this kind of nurture element, which is this family support. I've had parents that have, done so much for me and pushed me and, sorry, just spent so much time,
Yeah.
kind of
Encouraging you.
encouraging me and, sacrificing stuff kind of, whether it's time or finances, whatever it might be, to sort of help me grow in those fields that I enjoy. And yeah, I think that nurture element is just as important. So it's just something that I've been lucky to be in that position, really.
What do you think, watching your dad, move up, move up quickly and obviously working very hard? What did that teach you about drive, do you think?
I think it taught me that it's something that it is within your control. It's within your power, and I think actually sometimes sort of people, sort of too quick to say, oh, I don't come from the right place, or I don't have the right sort of support or this or that. And I think, there is an element of truth in all those factors, but actually, drive comes from within. And I think, my dad always taught me that if you need or want to do the next level or get to the next stage, it's within your control and you can do that. And yeah, there are ways to look for support to help you to do that, but it's got to come from in here. And so, I guess that's always taught me that if I want the next role, or I want to do another language, or I, want to get promoted, it's like, okay, how do I do this then? You can make it happen. And it's funny, there were sort of, I guess, things that happened in our childhood where my dad, we wanted to get the next house, for example, and it's like, right, I'm going to need to earn more, or I want to do this, I'm going to need to do this. And my dad was like, okay, how do I make that happen? Rather than sort of saying, oh, well, that's unfortunate, we're not going to be able to do that because, we can't, we're not able to. It was always a case of, well, if we need to do that, I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just taught me that if I want to do something, then I can, and it's just finding a way to get there. And so sort of having that self-belief, and I think, too often that can become arrogance, and it's sort of really making that boxed into that self-belief element and that drive, and, that's within you, within your control. And, it is sort of so intrinsically linked with determination, isn't it? It's like, okay, you might not succeed at first, but actually there'll be a different route, wait a little bit of time, try a different way. And I'm still so driven today in everything that I do. I try and instill that in my kids, and I don't think it's something that will ever leave me. It feels like it's just part of my DNA now to be driven and just to keep going.
Yeah,
really.
How are you installing it in your children?
Yeah, well, there's a fine balance between micromanaging their free time and showing them that,
Because they're only little, aren't they?
They are, yeah. They're 3 and 5, soon to be 4 and 6. So I'm out of the sort of toddler stage, but into the just as challenging kind of young person stage, if you will, and all the challenges that come with reception and starting school and all of that stuff. So I think there's a few ways you can break it down, whether it's like looking at determination and, something as simple as like putting a shoe on and, them not being able to do it and throwing it across the hall. And rather than just saying, okay, I'm time poor, I'll just put it on. It's sort of sitting down and being like, no, you can do this. Let's work it out together. You need to open the Velcro, put your foot in, and just trying to kind of, even when you're in a rush, trying to take a step back and saying, okay, the short-term quick solution is just to do it for you so we can get out the door. But actually trying to instill in them that, they can do it, make them determined. That I think sort of feeds through into that drive. And then, I watch my daughter, especially, if I show her this, then the next time, doing her buttons up, she won't let me help and she wants to do it. And so I can already see these kind of small nuggets. My son playing football couldn't do it. We kept practicing, showing him that it took me a long time, and I'll say things like, I couldn't do this when I was younger. I found, and then suddenly they say, oh, okay, it's okay to fail at first, but I'm going to remain determined. And I think that helps kind of, build that self-belief, build that drive, which hopefully they can take forward as they grow up and use to their advantage, I guess.
That's nice. So you done university, done the languages. What happened next?
So university, I went to Durham, and it's interesting actually. That was probably one of the sort of whole university piece was probably the hardest point in my life because, for the first time, really, I failed. I didn't get into Cambridge. And, I don't expect anybody to shed a tear for me, but I'm just trying to draw on it as a kind of pivotal moment, I guess, in my life where, um, everyone had told me that I had the grades, that I would get in. It was my kind of lifelong dream and plan at that point. We'd been visiting. I'd sort of pictured myself in Jesus College, and that's where I was going to be.
Yep.
And I remember the interviews just being horrific, and they gave me this piece of poetry. And, one thing that I really do not particularly like is foreign poetry. I'm very much focused on grammar and syntax, and the buildup of language is the bit of languages that I really enjoyed, and kind of the sort of the vocabulary and the oral element, less so kind of the literary element. And so when I got this poem, I just knew that I didn't understand it. And I just remember the interview being horrific. And I came out thinking, I don't think that's gone well. But then Cambridge just dragged out the whole process. And so effectively I got pulled, which is where you've not done enough to secure your place, but you've not quite been rejected. And it's sort of string you along for a couple more months. And I think I knew inevitably that it wasn't going to happen, but sort of I didn't give up. I didn't give up hope. And actually I thought, maybe this will play out. And anyway, it didn't. And, I remember thinking like, oh my God, this is a disaster. What will happen now? But I got into Durham, and I tried to look on the positive side. And actually, at Durham you can study 3 languages. I think it's one of the only universities still today that allows you to study 3, whereas Cambridge was 2. And so for me, actually, that was pretty exciting. And I thought, I can pick back up my Italian GCSE, and I can do French, Spanish, and Italian, and that's quite exciting. I do enjoy all 3. And anyway, I went to Durham, and it was great. And I ended up, doing those 3 languages for the first 2 years. And as I mentioned, you get this incredible year abroad. And most of my friends decided to go to university in that year. And so sort of, Durham partners through the Erasmus scheme then with different universities. And really, there is a little bit of learning, but you sort of pick a random subject to study. And really it's about, meeting people from all over Europe and having that sort of, cultural experience and improving your verbal skills, really. And I used it as a chance to work. So I ended up applying for a job at Lloyds Bank, sort of an internship effectively. And I went to Madrid to work for Lloyds Bank for 6 months. And I remember having sort of, student loan. I was being paid to work at Lloyds, and I had this Erasmus money at the time. And I was living in this sort of flat of 8 people from Italy and the UK and Germany. And it was just like this eclectic mix of people right in the middle of Madrid. If anyone knows Sol, it was sort of right near the main square in Madrid. And it was just amazing. I was sort of thrown into this professional environment in a foreign city while speaking Spanish, while learning corporate banking. And I guess kind of the rest is history, because I sort of ended that experience thinking, I must live abroad. I must work in a bank. And, it wasn't just the sort of maths element that came into it, but it was this kind of like people element. I was sort of having breakfast with a client, and then I was shadowing someone at lunch, and then there were meetings, and there were after work events, and it was just very social. It was obviously great for my Spanish at that point. But I just loved that. I just loved that sort of social element. And I think I sort of took that back to Durham and thought, I must have a career that involves kind of people skills and talking and all of that sort of stuff. So really that sort of led me into the next path really after university, and sort of staying within that banking sphere.
So what did not getting into Cambridge teach you looking back now?
I guess, things happen for a reason. I've been asked before, just sort of, with friends or whatever, sort of chatting, like, oh, what do you regret about life, or, what this, that, and the other, and I, it's quite cliche, isn't it? But I try to not think about regrets, because I think you can just get bogged down in like, oh, if I'd done this or that, or met this person or whatever. You can't change the past, right? It's happened. So, and I take that into work as well. We can't change what we did, but we can learn from that, going forward. And so, okay, so I didn't get in, but, what's the positive of going to Durham? Well, I met all these amazing people, including my husband, so there's so many just personal great things that came out of it. But, actually I managed to study 3 languages. That led me to this, year abroad. Arguably 3 languages got me into Lloyds Bank, and that got me into the banking sphere, which has led me into real estate. And so, I think it's taught me that, things happen for a reason. Pick yourself up and look at the next best opportunity, and that may end up being better than the one that you originally looked at in the first place.
So you leave Durham,
yeah,
and go and work in banking?
Yeah, came to the bright lights of London, came to the city,
Yeah.
and effectively did after I sort of finished at Lloyd's Bank for that year abroad. I interned at JP Morgan for the sort of classic investment banking summer internships, so sort of a couple of months in London. And the internship was amazing. You know, we were in Bank Street in Canary Wharf and, you know, surrounded by those tall towers, and that incredibly managed to stay around super intelligent people, you know, who worked all hours of the night working on like the biggest transactions in investment banking with people from all over Europe. It felt like just the dream role. You know, you'd speak Spanish on the seventh floor, getting a coffee from Starbucks, and then you'd be, you know, on a call with the biggest energy company in the world, or, you know, everything, all the numbers felt like they were sort of, you know, 3 digits too long, and everything was just so big and impressive.
Yeah.
And I remember as soon as I got there thinking, oh my God, this is for me, you know, and I'm someone that doesn't need that much sleep. I loved the long hours. I loved the kind of after work socializing and everything that came with that. And so, yeah, was elated to get sort of a role at the end of it effectively that meant, you know, once my degree had landed with the relevant grades, then I would come straight back after university and have a job, which also took the pressure off
Amazing.
the fourth year at university, which I'm very grateful for. Yeah. So, yeah, so I then sort of did fourth year and returned to JP Morgan after graduating.
And what was your role there? What were you doing day to day?
I started in the EMEA team, so sort of the Europe, Middle East and Africa division of investment banking, focused on chemical companies effectively. And I guess I'd picked chemical companies because of my dad being in PVC compounding, and actually a lot of the, you know, a lot of his clients, suppliers were companies like Solvay, you know, big chemical companies. And I thought, you know, I didn't have an allegiance with any sector. And so I just was sort of clinging onto that, thinking, oh, that's, you know, I kind of vaguely have heard of these names and this might be quite interesting. I guess the truth is when I actually got into that role, being the only Brit in the European team was actually quite difficult because most of the clients were obviously European. You know, we were covering European clients. So even though the working language was English, in terms of kind of written documents, so much was in kind of French and Spanish and Italian. And actually, I think, you know, that became quite difficult when we were talking about technical elements. You know, I wasn't technically trained. I was kind of learning on the job. You know, we did get sent to New York for kind of training before we got there, but that only teaches you so much. And, you know, I was with sort of highly intelligent people who'd studied economics and whatnot in Europe. And so I also think my sort of like social skills were probably slightly underused because I couldn't kind of convey myself as well as I would have been able to in the UK team. And so effectively I rotated out of that team, which is common in the first year. You know, everyone kind of does rotations in the first couple of years. I rotated into the UK investment banking team, and effectively there was a role in real estate. And I thought, I don't know anything about real estate, you know, other than like I can see buildings in London. But it was a very, very small team. And one of the sort of key things that attracted me to that team was that the team seemed really tight because it was so small. So to give some context, the team I was in the sort of European chemical team was like 30 people or so. And the UK real estate team was like 8 people. And so I thought, okay, great. It's a really lean team. That's going to allow me to kind of step up and probably have more, you know, sort of more coverage on these clients, and also really be able to kind of form relationships with people. And, you know, as I said, I like that element. And particularly when you're working ridiculously long hours, you know, working with people you can really connect with, felt like it would be important. So I ended up rotating into that team, and it was just one of the best things I've ever done. You know, I was with the most amazing colleagues, a really, really close team. They're still my friends today. You know, obviously I'm no longer at JP Morgan, but I talk to my sort of old boss from JP Morgan all the time. He was at my wedding and all the rest of it. So yeah, so I ended up in that team and went from there really.
Yeah. And then how do you end up where you are now?
Yeah, so I'm in this UK, the UK real estate team at JP Morgan. As I said, it's a small team, and it was very interesting times. This is kind of 2013, 2014. It's a really interesting time for the sector. You know, super buoyant, lots of activity, lots of capital raising, lots of equity raises. Which I didn't realize at the time. It's only now that I can look back, sort of, you know, 11 years ago to realize sort of how good those times were really for the market. But we were doing lots of deals, lots of transactions, including the IPO of Kennedy Wilson Europe, who at the time kind of listed on the London Stock Exchange in early 2014. And I was lucky enough to, literally by luck, and because we were such a small team, I ended up as one of the most junior people working mostly on all of the big projects, because obviously everybody needed that sort of analyst level support. So I ended up working on that transaction, and after we did that IPO, we had the chance to effectively pitch to be Kennedy Wilson's corporate broker, which effectively is the sort of UK specific model where you have an investment bank which really sort of holds your hand as a listed company. And so you're forming very strong relationships with the C-suite. You're effectively their trusted and retained advisor, and you're looking at everything from, their results presentations, how to come up with the messaging, their capital structure, should they be raising equity, should they be raising debt, sort of messaging to shareholders. And to do that, you get a really, really good understanding of the company. And so I was having this experience on lots of different, listed companies across the UK, but Kennedy Wilson, was a standout because it had just IPO'd and it was new and it was in huge growth mode. And so, as their corporate broker, which, I should say we pitched to be corporate broker and won effectively, which was, a huge win for us. I got this immediate exposure to the CEO effectively of Kennedy Wilson Europe and her team. And we were working with them on a day-to-day basis because they were so new and in growth mode. They obviously needed significantly more hand-holding than more established companies because the message is changing and they're doing, sort of bond issuances and capital raises, equity raises. And so, sort of crafting that message to the shareholders was so critical. And it was just such an exciting time to be part of that journey for a company that really needed you and where you could really add value. And gaining that sort of trust and exposure to the senior management team was something that I was having more on that account than any other account. And I remember there being some pivotal moments where we were sort of raising the debut bond issuance for Kennedy Wilson Europe. And I remember sitting in a boardroom at their office in just off the top of Berkeley Square. Incredible boardroom, super big tables, by far kind of the most junior person in the room, really sort of in listening mode with my boss. And I just remember thinking during that meeting, I'm sat on the wrong side of the table, and I sort of ultimately, I felt like I sort of knew as much as what sort of the Kennedy Wilson team were going to say. And just sort of, I sort of knew their business so well because we were sort of coming up with these messages together that the direct investing side just resonated with me and got me so much more excited than what the sort of bank was offering as advice. If that makes sense. And so just sort of the drivers of their business and the way they were thinking, I just thought that's how I'm thinking. I'm thinking like you're thinking. I'm not thinking, like the sort of the advisor.
I understand.
And so I think that was a key aspect, but also the people. I just immediately bonded with the team. I just thought they were incredible. Their sort of, their drive, their ambition, their growth, the fact that they'd just done this, sort of £1 billion IPO and they were going to go again and raise equity and raise debt, and they were looking at these huge portfolios. And I just thought, wow, they just know what they want to do and they know how they're going to get there. And, Mary, who's the CEO, it was like, how are we going to get there? Not will we get there? That was kind of the rhetoric. Just really resonated with me. And I just sort of fell in love with them, really. And that sort of drove me to thinking about resigning and working on the direct side of the table. And, colleagues before me had done this. It's quite a well-trodden path in an investment bank. Lots of people actually join and say, I'll stay here for 2-3 years and then I'll move to private equity. That was never my game plan. I didn't come from this world of really even knowing that was a path. I was very much like, oh, this role sounds really exciting. Following my experience in Madrid, I'm going to do this role and then we'll see what happens. And I actually, back then, if you'd asked me, I'd have probably said, oh, my dream is to be an MD in the bank. I just sort of saw myself as working my way up the ladder. And actually in a bank, there is quite a defined career path. So it is quite easy to sort of see that growth. So this was a bit of a U-turn for me, and I'm not used to U-turns.
Was it a shock?
It was a bit of a shock to feel like that because I sort of thought that this was going to be my career, and I was going to be at JP Morgan, and I had the pension, and it was sort of, this is what I'm going to be doing, and it was probably a little bit unsettling but exciting at the same time to think, oh, I'm not as in love with the role as I should be. And actually, I think I like that role more. And how am I going to get there? And so, sort of talking to colleagues, your ex-colleagues, previous colleagues, and doing some research. And, some of the colleagues in the team before me had left to go to other shops, other private equity companies, sort of getting their advice. I effectively started interviewing, which when you're an analyst in an investment bank in a very small team, we just worked on the take private of the Canary Wharf Group, sort of 2.6 billion transaction, one of the biggest transactions in UK real estate history. I was sort of running off sort of, large sleep deficit. And the thought of actually then sort of picking myself up to try and interview, it was like, okay, I don't know any headhunters. How do I do this? And there was a bit of kind of navigating to do. And I remember spending like sort of a whole week at work and then on a Saturday trying to like model what I would need to do for the test to get into sort of a private equity shop. Some folks sent me some models, be like, this is the sort of thing you'll have to build. This is a completely different type of modeling to what we're doing at JP Morgan. And so I'm sort of like teaching myself on a Saturday, really I want to be sort of out and about and sort of seeing friends. And I thought, I'm going to have to dedicate time to this, because I'm not just going to be able to interview and get this role, because actually technically it's a little bit different to what I'm doing. I'm going to need to work on this. But anyway, I did that and had a couple of failed interview attempts, which again, I guess didn't get me down so much, because I knew that I was actually going to have to do this to end up sort of getting a bit better and finding the right fit as well. Like there's, private equity houses very much differ. So that sort of fitting in element is really important. So actually through that interview process, you'll meet someone and think, okay, you don't think I'm great, but I'm also not vibing you that much either. And I don't think I'm going to work here. So
how old are you at this time?
So I would have been sort of 25.
So super, super young.
Yeah.
And you're
younger, 23.
Wow. So you're coming off a path that you've sort of set your heart on.
Yeah.
And then you've gone, actually, there's something that's way more exciting over here.
Yeah.
Now I need to work out how I'm going to get on this new path.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think folks had done it before me. Yeah. So that sort of gave me the sort of confidence to think that, this is possible.
Yeah.
But, there are so many bright people at these investment banks. I mean, it's bright people everywhere, right? I mean, all over the place. But I was surrounded by incredible people at JP Morgan who had gone out and interviewed and got these roles. And I think I just felt, when it came technically, I just felt pretty inadequate, because I just hadn't had this experience. These tests were difficult. Mm-hmm. The interviews were difficult. And so it took quite a lot of like additional studying and time and researching and reading, which I'd done to get into JP Morgan. I sort of felt like once I had a job, I could just focus on the job. But then, to do something different, you have to start again, right? And you have to kind of teach yourself a bit and learn. But I knew this is what I wanted to do, and all the time I'm still working on the Kennedy Wilson account. Yeah. I'm still doing my day job. And so I kept going, really supportive friends and family, and they, everyone was sort of saying, you sure this is the right thing? And I thought, yeah. And also, when you're doing those hours, it's really hard mentally when you've decided that you want to leave to keep doing your job to 100%. And it's really difficult to be doing that kind of role at sort of like a 50% level. You can't kind of like half do a presentation. It's like it needs to be finished because there's a meeting. And so you're having to sort of still put 100% or 110% into your current job, and then finding the time, energy, effort, mental resource to kind of prepare for these interviews. So yeah, it was a bit of a slog. It took longer than I thought it would take. But eventually I landed a role. It seemed perfect. It was doing industrial investment in Spain. So a UK company kind of sitting in London, but looking after kind of Spanish investments. And so I thought, oh, finally,
perfect,
full circle. I can speak Spanish. That had really helped with the interview process. The guy covering the desk was amazing. And, he spoke Spanish. I think he had a Spanish wife. And so I thought, actually, I've really found the fit, found the person that I'd like to work for. I found the role. Industrial was a super interesting sector at that point. And I'd worked with Seagrow and a couple of other companies. And so I thought, actually, this is going to be really interesting.
So how long from that first seed of, I need to do something different, to getting offered that role?
I'd say like a good 9 months.
Okay, so that's a long time.
It's a long time, yeah. And I think part of that is because, they would say, can you come in next week? And it was like, I mean, no, I can't, because I'm away, or I'm traveling, or I'm doing this presentation. So these processes actually end up taking like quite a long time, particularly when you sort of do 2 and they go nowhere.
Yeah.
And then the third, you decide that you're kind of not vibing that crew. And so you then need to start again. But I was really conscious of finding the right fit, because people had said to me, once you've moved, you don't want that CV jumping. And, it's something we can come to. I think maybe today it's potentially less relevant, but particularly, this is like 11 years ago, that was not considered to be, particularly beneficial for an industry that I was in. And so I thought I really need to make the right move, because once I'm in, I'm going to be in. And there's going to be a probation period. And so I need to pass that. And so I need to be sure that I'm sort of like qualified enough to do this job.
Absolutely.
So I remember landing the role, like just feeling elated, thinking, okay, I've done it and I'm going to resign. And I remember the day of resigning so vividly. And I say we were in Canary Wharf with the 29th floor of JP Morgan's building on Bank Street, where the views are, you can imagine, just absolutely stunning, kind of, floor to ceiling glass windows. And my boss had an amazing office, sort of obviously on the west side. And I remember sort of like walking in with this piece of paper that was, sort of shaking in my hand. And it was just the least convincing resignation that he said he's ever had. Because I basically walked in, I sat down holding this piece of paper, and then I basically burst into tears and was like, it's not you. I just need to
Not
leave.
you, it's me.
Yeah, it's not you, it's me. And I think I felt a sense of like I was letting him down, but also like, was this the right thing? And actually, when it came down to it, I didn't hate the job I was doing. I just thought I would like another one more.
Sure.
And I just, something inside felt like I was in the wrong seat. And you've got such a long career ahead of you. It's like, I'm not going to be able to do this job, if I don't feel like I should be here. And anyway, so the sort of resignation process happened, and he was like, do you want to think about it? And I was like, no, I've done the thinking. This is what I want to do. And so, everyone at the bank sort of hates you a little bit, and, you sort of get your garden leave, whatever. And I remember being in Sri Lanka on an elephant, which is where I spent a couple of weeks on garden leave with a friend, and getting a phone call from...
For season 3 of Places She Shapes, we're delighted to be supported by Cripps. Cripps is a top 100 UK law firm, working with businesses and individuals across corporate, real estate, litigation, and private client services. Cripps is passionate about solving problems, championing ambitions, making a positive, lasting difference, and is particularly proud to support female leaders, amplifying their stories to help drive meaningful change.
And I remember being in Sri Lanka on an elephant, which is where I spent a couple of weeks on garden leave with a friend, and getting a phone call from who was Mary, who was then the president of Kennedy Wilson Europe, saying, like, I need you to do something for me, effectively. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I've resigned. And effectively, she sort of said, if you're leaving JP Morgan, you're working for me. And it was like, okay. I think in my heart, I had dreamt that this would happen.
Oh,
and
wow.
so it was
What
sort
a
of
moment.
like, it was one of those incredible moments where you're like, really? Okay. And so I guess the long and short of it is I never joined the company that was doing the Spanish sheds, where I was meant to be going. And we ended up having this sort of negotiation process to join Kennedy Wilson while I was on garden leave. They had no role, obviously. They sort of created one for me. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. But at the same time, my now current boss was also joining. So I remember meeting him in the boardroom, both of us sort of, joining from different companies, me from JPM and him from Blackstone. And it was sort of like, this is Mike, you're going to work for him, and he's going to look after asset management. And, we've got hundreds of assets, kind of get stuck in. And yeah, October 15, I joined Kennedy Wilson, and I'm still there today. So
what did Mary see in you that made her phone? Well, she phoned you for a different reason, but you're on an elephant in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
What made her go, you're coming to work for me? What was it she saw in you?
Yeah, I don't know. You'd have to ask her. I mean, I guess, if I try and think sort of critically, I had a lot of knowledge of the business because they'd been through this sort of IPO and then secondary equity raise and a bond issuance. The company was in this growth mode, and I'd sort of been there on the whole journey, sort of effectively from the outset of its European sort of listed life. And so, there were lots of activities, kind of daily activities that I was doing for her and her team kind of constantly.
Yeah.
And so I guess, she thought that, having that element of continuity, I guess, being able to bring that sort of experience and knowledge from the IPO days sort of through to the business would be helpful. I think I'd like to think she also thought I was a good fit and someone that she, had bonded with, trusted, saw something, in me that she wanted to bring to KW. I think one of the incredible things about Mary and lots of people at KW is that they, people is our biggest asset, right? And lots of companies say that, but I think KW really does that. And we, you have no business without great people. And for her, when she was coming to Europe, and, I don't want to speak for her, but I think coming to Europe and having to sort of build a team from scratch, assets come and go, and you find opportunities at the right point in the cycle constantly, which makes sense. But people, you have to grab great people when you see them. And so if you want to build a business from the ground up, it's fundamental to the business's success that you've got great people around you. And I think, something that she did incredibly was just pick those people and put them together and create this incredible team. And actually not just thinking about individuals, but thinking about how they work together and what they all bring to the business and how that can, translate into the business's success. So I think she saw me as somebody that would fit well and could bring something to the business.
You hadn't thought of asking them for a job before?
I mean, I had, and I, I've never told her this, but I actually remember kind of the rare moments in Canary Wharf when me and I've got two of my best friends were also on the investment banking program. There are, a scarcity of women in investment banking. So when you had sort of 3 British women on the same training program, obviously we were going to be best friends for life, and that's still the case now. So I remember rare moments when we would escape for, a glass of rosé in Canary Wharf, and actually, me kind of saying to them, oh God, I wish Mary would just ask me to work for her. This would make this whole process so much easier, and I'd get my weekends back and I wouldn't have to stress about these modelling tests. But it was just, I just didn't have the confidence, and it just felt so inappropriate. And I thought, if it backfires, this could all just come tumbling down. And then if she tells my boss that but it was definitely something that I dreamt of, which is why when it sort of happened, I just sort of looked up and was like, oh God, thank you.
Maybe you made it happen.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, yeah. I mean, I definitely dedicated a lot of love and time and effort and, everything really to sort of helping them and to the team. And,
So
I'd like to think that paid off, I guess.
So you've been at Kennedy Wilson a long time now. What is it about the role that you're loving? How do you feel about women in the real estate space? Can you just talk me through that?
Yeah. 11, coming up for 11 years. I think I'm now rounding up, so I think I'm saying 11 now. It is a long time, and it's sort of the longest. It's the longest I've ever done anything for. Probably, if you sort of think about breaking down your life. Yeah. It is funny because when I talk to people, I still talk about JP Morgan so much. I still think I probably have spent more hours working at JP Morgan than I have at Kennedy Wilson. I can't work out if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But yeah, it's 11 years. I guess, I've because I didn't come into a role as such, I've moved across the business more than most people. And part of that has been luck, and part of that has been deliberate. And I've got Mary and my current boss Mike to thank for that, and for sort of helping me continue to be a generalist, which is something that I've touched on and I want to remain. And I really saw the benefit in sort of having that breadth of experience across the business. And also importantly, I'm not a specialist, and so sort of I don't want to pretend to be a specialist in something when that hasn't been my background. Actually, I think there's lots of things that I can bring to different areas, and fortunately the company has seen that and sort of helped that become a reality. So even though I've been there 11 years, I haven't done the job as such for 11 years. I've sat in asset management, I've sat in acquisitions, I've been to the US for a few months, I've done strategy. And so, and also that's against the backdrop of a company that has continued to evolve over 11 years. I came when we were listed in the UK on the London Stock Exchange. We then delisted, and we're going through a take private process now in the US, where we will be delisting. We expect to delist if that shareholder vote comes through in the US. We'll then be a private company. And we focused on, loan to own strategies. Then we focused more on direct real estate on the equity side. We've done a fund series. We're now focused on separate managed accounts. And so, that the nature of that business to be dynamic and continue evolving, which I think is pretty unique to Kennedy Wilson, has also made the job very exciting and continued to be dynamic and change. Yeah. I think had I stayed in the same role for 11 years, I'd be talking to you from a different company, because, I would definitely have got bored, as I'm sure lots of people would. So again, part of that is luck, but also picking a company where I knew that they, the makeup of the business and Bill's leadership, and, we do continue to evolve and grow. And that's the sort of organization that I want to be in, and I'm so fortunate to be in. I guess sort of, so that's how I've managed to stay for 11 years, I guess. And I'm grateful for that. You mentioned sort of women and the role of women.
Yeah, you've been in sort of both underrepresented industries, really, haven't you?
I have, yeah. I saw an article yesterday, actually, that said the sort of data points to actually now at the more junior level, more of a sort of 50-50 balance between men and women in across the whole of the real estate industry. So that's obviously encompassing not just kind of private equity style investing, but, all of the various roles. And by the time you get sort of board and C-suite, data points to that being around 10 to 15%. These stats aren't new to anybody. No. We kind of all know that this is the case, and there's obviously lots of different factors at play, and some of that is elective, but a lot of that is, not elective effectively. And it's, it's difficult. It's hard, and it's, it's something that um, plays out every day, but you can't moan about it every day because there's nothing, you can't change it today effectively. Um, and even just kind of the simple things as like the conversation in the open plan, for example, will be generally something orientated around men, because they're talking. So they're talking about, like, I don't know, a sport or like beer, I don't know, whatever it might be, right? As in, it's alienating in lots of ways that maybe a male wouldn't understand, because it's not deliberate. It's just them being them, which, a consequence of that is that it can alienate a female. I'm explaining that in a very inarticulate way, but that's
I get your point.
yeah. So it's been hard, and it continues to be hard. And I think for me, one of the great things, and probably if I think back and I asked my friends from, my two girlfriends from JP Morgan, definitely one of the things at the time that attracted me to Kennedy Wilson and why I sort of loved them so much was because they had this big female,
This great role model.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, and don't get me wrong, my boss at JP Morgan is also incredible, and a male, and a huge role model to me. But, clearly when it's a woman in an industry where women are underrepresented, it's so much easier for them to sort of be a role model, and for you to kind of, look at them and sort of want to be them. And I think back to my days in Lloyd's, actually, and my boss then was also a female, and she said to me, if at any point you don't aspire to be your boss, then you're in the wrong job. And I've always remembered that. And I think about it all the time. And it's not to mean that when you join a company or you start a role, you immediately want to replace your boss and get rid of them.
No,
That's not what she's saying. If at any point you sort of lose that sort of admiration, or, sort of that element of looking up to someone and saying, I can see you, I want to be you, this is my drive, I want to sort of get there, then you probably need to change tack, because, otherwise sort of what keeps you going and what motivates you to get to that next level. And I guess sort of on a simple level, that's obviously much easier when you're a female and your role model's a female, particularly in a industry where there aren't many women, because you can literally see how you can get from A to B. Whereas when you're dealing with all these other factors that just fall on women by virtue of falling on them, and it's not deliberate and it's no one's fault, it's obviously harder to be like, I'm not sure I can get there because I also need to do this, this and this, and you're not having to juggle that. And so it felt so easy having that sort of female leadership. And also, just the sort of the conversation in the room is different. The sort of way people act is slightly different. That sort of the relevance is there. And, I think, yeah, I think it is hard. I mean, I'm constantly on the lookout for, great people to look up to, and to, I think everybody needs a mentor, right? Like there's this kind of misconception that once you reach a certain level, whether that be CEO, MD, whatever it might be, like suddenly you're the mentor. And that's right. Like I have a really important job of mentoring the juniors, male and female, in our office, but particularly, I like to think that the junior females can look up to me as someone who, has reached this level, has a family, has a husband, and if that is what they want to achieve, that is possible to achieve it. It's not what everyone wants. That's cool, but you're sort of setting out that this can be achieved if you want it to be. And it sometimes feels impossible in this industry where you're so underrepresented that I'm never going to be able to get there because no one else has. So, how am I going to be able to do it? But so suddenly you're sort of being the mentor, but also you still want to be the mentee, and you're still trying to find that person that you need to look up to, because everybody needs that. And I think if you spoke to Mary, for example, as a CEO, she would say that she has mentors, and actually there's never a point at which sort of somebody doesn't need somebody. So I think it is difficult, and it's something that I do struggle with, and it's probably one of the things that I wish was easier. But there are great females in the organization that I look up to, and I also try and, as I say, I try and also sort of use the mentees to help me as well. Hearing about what they think and their struggles, and actually sort of trying to help them also then helps me, because actually as you talk about these things and discuss them, then there are new ways that you can think about certain issues or whatever it might be to sort of navigate that path. But
yeah,
it's something I'm trying to champion, and I do spend time, with mentoring groups internally, externally, to just, to show people that it is possible, and you can have everything if you want it.
My final question: how has motherhood changed your relationship with ambition?
I mean, I guess for anyone that's lucky enough to be a mum, because I think it's just the best job in the world. Once that happens, everything else is less important in life, I think, at least for me. And so it doesn't matter kind of how driven you are, how ambitious you are, your family support, whatever it might be. Like once you have a child, that is just the most important job that you have. But so I guess sort of, ambition for work is still just as strong as it was, but it's just like slightly less important than my kids and my family. But that's not to say that it's still not there. And I think as you sort of go through life and the kids go through different stages, that it sort of ebbs and flows in terms of how much you can put into it. And at times when you just need to kind of say to yourself, I just need to leave today because I kind of need to do this and it's really important. And I've definitely made mistakes on that as well. I've not done that and regretted it and missed something or been late for something and actually kind of looked myself in the mirror and gone, what are you doing? Like, you only get one shot at this dance production. Like it's not going to come again. And, and it's, what does it mean to Oscar or Florence if I'm not there and the impact that will have on them? And so, and actually I'm very grateful to the company that I'm in who are, absolutely of that rhetoric and super supportive of, families and personal life and would never, advocate missing anything, of that nature. I think it's just about it's just trying to juggle the balance, and it's impossible, and there's always guilt. And I think, I talked about there just not being enough hours in a day. If I had a magic power, it would just be to create more hours in the day. I just run out of time to do everything, and whether that's doing the extra thing at work or going to the gym or seeing my poor husband, who is like, the absolute rock of our family, and I couldn't do any of this without him, and something always has to give because there just isn't enough time. Maybe sleep gives.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just constantly trying to perfect the juggle. And, I talk to some of the juniors and they kind of say, how do you do it? And I'm like, I'm definitely not doing it perfectly. I'm always making mistakes. I try to live by a few rules. I try to have a routine. I try to keep the weekends as, kind of precious time. But, it's never perfect. And actually COVID didn't help with this because COVID kind of blurred for me these lines between work and home because we were working at home. And so it's like you sort of end up doing work things while trying to do family things. And I really try now and separate like going to the office and working and then coming home and trying to spend, 10, 15 minutes, no phone, just actually dedicating it to the kids, looking them in the eye, not trying to multitask. But I guess my ambition for work is just as strong, and probably I now have more ambition because I'm now also having ambition for my own kids. I want them to succeed. I want them to do what they want to do. I want them to have opportunities. I want them to be, happy. I want them to get enough sleep. I want them to be successful, all of those good things. And so actually I just become probably more driven than ever because you've got two more people to have ambition for effectively.
So as you know, the podcast is called Places She Shapes. So we've got some shaping moments questions around the places she shapes. So the places one, you're in a room with everyone you've ever met, dead or alive, excluding your immediate family. Who would you look for first?
Frankie, my best friend, because she's always the life and soul of the party.
And finally, shapes, how would you shape your ideal day?
My ideal day. It would start with a lie-in. I don't know if I remember what one of those is, but it would start with a lie-in, and then a good flat white and an almond croissant. Probably a stroll in the Olympic Park, which is where I live. I would stay local to home. A good barbecue on the green egg. My husband does a great kind of slow roasted like lamb on the green egg. So I think we'd do that with maybe a salsa verde and some French bread. A glass of rosé in the garden. And then I'm toying between relaxing on the sofa and going out to sort of a great bar. But it'd probably be going out to a great bar, getting some friends along and just, dancing the night away.
Nice. I love the days where people tell me the food that they're going to eat. I really appreciate that.
I know. I feel guilty I didn't include the kids in that. But yeah, sorry, guys.
That's brilliant. Lottie, you're great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this conversation, follow Places She Shapes wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss the rest of season 3.